Welcome to Chronicles by Candlelight. Subscribing helps the channel grow and lets you stay updated with every new video, so you never miss the content you enjoy. You are listening to Fracture. Episode 8, The Perfect Timing. This was a battle between two of the top 12, Rank 8, Elise Hancock versus Rank 12, Brian Topman. The instant Brian Topman's fist slammed into Elise's reinforced block, her glowing purple plasma whip wrapped around her forearm snapped forward and coiled around his wrist like a living rope. For a split second she had him, but Brian reacted immediately. The air around his hand compressed violently, and a burst of shockwave energy detonated outward from his palm. The force shattered the whip's grip and blew the plasma coil loose before it could tighten any further. Neither of them stepped back. Instead, they stayed exactly where they were, right in each other's space. What followed was a rapid exchange of close combat strikes that happened so fast the crowd gasped. Brian attacked first. He drove forward with a flurry of jabs, each punch carrying a compressed shockwave that detonated at the edge of his knuckles. The strikes cracked through the air like miniature explosions as he hammered forward with aggressive precision. Elise met them calmly. Each punch was deflected or redirected with tight, efficient parries. The plasma whip never left her arms. Instead, they reinforced her blocks as the attacks came in. The clash looked almost even from where I sat. They looked pretty matched, I muttered. Jasper shook his head slightly without taking his eyes off the fight. Topman's got the advantage right now, he said. I glanced at him. Why? Shockwaves, he said simply. That ability is built for close combat. On the arena floor, Elise slipped another strike, just enough for the punch to pass her shoulder. And in that tiny opening, she stepped in and slammed her shoulder straight into Brian's chest. The impact knocked him back several steps across the arena floor, forcing him to slide before he could regain balance. But Elise didn't chase him. Instead, the plasma whip snapped downward and stabbed into the ground beside her like an anchor. The moment it connected, she pulled, and her body shot sideways across the arena. The whip acted like a grappling line as it dragged her out of striking range in a blur of motion. In an instant, the distance between them reopened. The whip uncoiled from the floor and slithered across the arena like living lines of light. Brian launched forward again, shockwaves blasting beneath his steps as he tried to close the gap the same way he had earlier. But this time, he didn't get far. One of the plasma tendrils snapped sideways. The strike didn't hit him directly, but the force redirected his movement and pushed him off his line before he could fully close the distance. 6 feet, Luca said casually beside me. Yeah, Jasper nodded. Anything closer than that and it gets uncomfortable for her. On the arena floor, Elise attacked. Her twin tendrils whipped forward in quick stabbing motions, lashing toward Brian with sharp, lightning-fast jabs. Brian's reflexes were impressive. He twisted and slipped through the first strikes, weaving just outside the whip's path. But there was more to Elise's attacks. Each time Elise jabbed forward, the whip didn't simply retract. Instead, it looped upward in a vertical arc before snapping down again. This motion gradually extended the whip's effective reach with every strike. Brian dodged 2 more attacks, but the next whip strike caught his arm. The plasma lash cracked across his sleeve with a sharp burst of light. Yeah! Jasper suddenly shouted, jumping halfway out of his seat. A few nearby students glanced over at him as he pumped his fist in excitement. When he sat back down, his grin was huge. I'd love to fight her, he said. She'd annihilate you, Luca said. Jasper shrugged happily. Definitely, he admitted. Still worth it, though. I stared at him for a second. Jasper Bone might actually be insane. My attention drifted back to the arena as the fighters reset again, but something else caught my eye this time. The combat uniforms. For a brief moment, after the plasma whip struck Brian's arm, the fabric of his suit had flashed faintly, almost like it had absorbed part of the impact. I frowned. Hey, I said, glancing toward Jasper. What's up with their uniforms? The group looked at me strangely, like I had just asked why the sky was blue. What? I asked. Did I say something weird? Everyone knows that, Jasper blinked. Knows what? I asked. That's the Institute's combat gear, he explained. State-of-the-art stuff. It's woven with medical magic, Zuri added. Jasper continued. It monitors injuries and activates protective spells if things get too dangerous. It blocks about 30% of certain attacks, Luca said. Mostly the ones that would normally seriously harm someone. Jasper leaned forward and pointed toward the official's viewing box. And it's not just some random gear, he added. It's one of the medical department's big inventions. I followed the direction of his finger. Inside the rectangular official's box was a middle-aged woman with neat hair and round glasses. That's the head of the medical department, Jasper continued. She designed the combat suits. He glanced back at me and shook his head with a faint smile. You really need to brush up on your academy knowledge. Mia folded her arms beside me. Especially since you're so weak, she added flatly. I didn't have an argument for that, but part of me wondered if I should tell them about the mix-up with my enrollment. Explain that I hadn't even meant to be placed in the combat department in the first place. But before I could decide, the fight below shifted again. Things were heating up. Elise Hancock had changed tactics. Instead of simply striking with the twin plasma whips, she began chaining attacks together. One whip would lash forward while the other curved through the air and snapped against it, the impact redirecting the second whip at a completely new angle. She effectively chased Brian Topman across the arena. One of the strikes landed. The plasma whip cracked against his side and drove him down to one knee. Before he could recover, Elise followed with a barrage of strikes. The whip snapped forward again and again, the attacks raining down like a storm of purple light. Brian blocked what he could, reinforcing his forearms with short bursts of shockwave energy. Even so, several strikes slipped through. Then he roared, and with a sudden burst of effort, he surged back to his feet and released a massive pulse of energy. Shockwaves exploded outward from his body. Instead of focusing the power into individual attacks, he covered himself in it completely. The air around him vibrated violently as a dense layer of compressed force wrapped around him from head to toe. The next whip strike hit him and bounced off. Another strike came, and that one bounced off too. Jasper jumped up again. What heart? He shouted, clapping. After a moment, he dropped back into his seat, still grinning. Why didn't he do that from the start? I frowned. Because he won't last long, Luca answered. Using his ability non-stop like that will knock him out. Jasper nodded in agreement. Yeah, it's a last-ditch move, he said approvingly. Respectable. It's weak, Luca shrugged. Either way, Mia said. He has to finish this quickly. Down below, Brian charged again. This time the difference was obvious. With shockwaves constantly reinforcing his body, his speed and power had doubled. Each step slammed against the arena floor like a cannon blast as he rushed forward. Elise tried to block, but even with the plasma whip reinforcing her guard, the punch drove through her defense. The impact launched her across the arena. She hit the ground hard and rolled before stopping several meters away. She looked hurt. The fight's over, I said. Brian rushed forward for the finish. But as Elise pushed herself up, something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating, she launched toward him. One whip snapped downward and latched onto the arena floor, propelling her forward like a slingshot straight into his path. Jasper leaned forward. Now this is interesting, he said. Brian threw his punch. The strike carried immense force, the shockwave exploding outward as his arms surged forward toward her. But before the punch connected, Elise's second whip snapped and tightened around his forearm just as she slipped past him. The moment their bodies crossed paths, a loud crack echoed through the arena. A sickening snapping sound rippled across the hall, and Brian Topman collapsed onto the ground, screaming and clutching his arm. She broke it. Luca nodded calmly. Her tactical IQ is insane. Jasper whistled. I stared at the arena, completely lost. What just happened? I asked. Jasper leaned back slightly, clearly pleased to explain. I wasn't sure before, but now I know, he said. Every time Topman attacked, he infused his shockwaves right before the strike hit. Not too early, not too late. To protect his arm, Luca added. Shockwave abilities like his can damage the user's body if they aren't timed properly. Exactly, Jasper nodded. So he activates it right before impact to absorb the stress. So what did she do? I asked. Jasper's grin widened. She figured out there's a tiny window between the start of the punch and the moment the shockwave reinforcement kicks in. And she timed it? My eyes widened slightly. Perfectly, Luca said. Jasper gestured toward the arena. She used the speed from his lunge and the speed from her own movement, then forced his arm to change direction before the shockwave reinforcement could activate. The joint took all the stress and snapped. Luca finished. I stared down at the arena, stunned. Elise Hancock stood quietly near the center, while Brian lay on the ground, clutching his broken arm. What shocked me even more was that Jasper and Luca had figured it out almost instantly. A moment later, the presenter's voice echoed through the massive hall. The winner. A pause built the tension. Rank 8. Elise Hancock. The crowd erupted into cheers. Elise gave a small, composed bow toward the official's box before turning and leaving the arena floor, her plasma whip dissolving into faint streaks of light as she disappeared through the fighter's gate. The medical team had already escorted Brian Topman out through the opposite side, his arm carefully supported by a glowing brace. For a moment, the arena floor sat empty. Then something strange happened. Faint lines began glowing across the circular stage, and the runic patterns beneath the stone brightened like veins of light waking up. Cracks from the earlier fight sealed themselves in seconds, and broken fragments of stone sliding back into place as if the floor itself remembered what it was supposed to look like. I leaned forward, watching in amazement. Within moments, the arena looked untouched, smooth and perfect, like nothing had happened at all. "That's incredible," I muttered under my breath. There really was no end to what Aetherium seemed capable of. The presenter returned to the center of the arena once the repairs finished, his voice once again echoing across the massive hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for the next match," he said. The crowd quieted, though a ripple of anticipation rolled through the stands. "For the fourth bout," he raised his hand dramatically. "Rank number 2, Zach Champion." The arena exploded. Students shot to their feet, cheering loudly as the gate on the eastern side of the arena opened. A medium-height student stepped onto the stage. From this distance, he looked younger than I expected for someone ranked so high. His hair was silver and cut short, and in each hand he carried a pair of wooden training sticks that spun lazily between his fingers as he walked forward. But that wasn't the strange part. He was blindfolded. "Wait!" I blinked. Jasper leaned forward sharply. "No way," he murmured. "Is he fighting blind?" Down in the arena, Zach Champion walked calmly toward the center of the platform, the 2 sticks still twirling lightly between his fingers as if he were warming up. The opposite gate opened next. "Rank number 5, Peter Law." Another wave of cheers burst across the arena. Peter Law stepped onto the stage with a completely different presence. His hair was in a tight crew cut, and the way he carried himself reminded me immediately of a soldier. His movements looked disciplined. Watching the 2 of them face each other sent a strange chill through me. But then something even stranger happened. Despite the blindfold, I suddenly had the overwhelming feeling that Zach Champion had looked straight at me. My stomach tightened. There were thousands of people in this arena, and yet, for a brief moment, it felt like I had been singled out from the entire crowd. My eyes suddenly began to sting. I blinked rapidly, raising a hand to rub them. "What the?" I muttered. Beside me, Jasper's expression shifted slightly as he looked at me. "Hey," he said slowly. "What's going on with your eyes?" Subscribe for new episodes. See you next time.